everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like X-Men, Invincible Iron Man, and the Giant Kokjü. It's Gerry Duggan. Thanks for coming on, Gerry. Are you laughing at your own title?
I am, because it's also the first time that the name has been uttered, and then I have to walk out. The curtain goes up. I have been having a lot of fun. I guess for those that don't know, I've been publishing that it's a giant monster attack comic with Scott Koblish on our Substack, and then we're bringing it to Image in the spring for a 3-issue mini.
I think it's the first time I've ever said a comic title that I'm slightly concerned will actually get Apple to add an explicit label to this episode because of it.
Finally.
I'm going to be censored because your comic's title.
Yeah. It would not be the worst thing to probably happen as a result of this comic existing, but we'll see.
That's true. Actually, I think it'd probably be good if that happened, because then you could have this whole thing where I'm sure you get a lot of earned media for the fact that a podcast was shut down because the name of this comic, yeah. And then all of a sudden there's a million articles where people are mad or excited or whatever about it, and next thing you know, you and Scott are very happy people.
That's right. I hope so. I mean, it's it was a labor of love, which sounds silly. It was a funny idea for anyone that maybe is not familiar with it. It's a anatomically correct monster attack. It's a monster. The first thing it does when it gets there, it has to relieve itself. And and I've been watching Godzilla movies and monster attack movies for years. It's sort of, they're all sexless. They're beasts. And so we couldn't talk ourselves out of how funny it would be to deal with a city or a town and put real personal human problems into a character, and then they're also dealing with, hey, the monster doesn't just want to eat you; it may also have some other urges. It's really a cornucopia of mostly low hanging fruit, and. But I think it works. It's really fun. I hope you've read it.
I have.
Zeb Wells told me. I guess I thought I was done hiding comics under the bed. I'm back to that though, and you're either going to laugh or you're not. But Roger Ebert has a quote that we put up at the top. You can't explain to someone why something is funny, and you can't reason someone out of an erection.
Yeah.
And it's true. That's a true philosophy, a great philosopher. Roger Ebert was way ahead of his time. And I think he would have laughed at this.
I will say this. When I was reading it initially, like with all things, I read it in bed at night, and I kept finding myself angling it away from my wife so she didn't see what I was reading.
That's very, very funny.
It is really funny. I mean, it's not so catastrophically inappropriate. Well, let me introduce it in full. It's the Giant Kokjü, your upcoming 3-issue Image miniseries with Scott Koblish, Hi-Fi Colors, and Joe Sabino that you've been releasing on Substack already. The solicit has to be said. There are words that I sort of cannot believe I'm about to say, to be honest. We now begin the quoted section. A tale of woe. The Giant Kokjü is about a monster with physical needs. It needs a restroom. It needs food too. And most unfortunately, it needs sexual satisfaction. The only things standing in its way are the men and women of science. I feel like this is a pretty good review for the book, and probably exactly what you would look for from somebody who's reading it from the first time. I was reading it on my iPad, and I was taking screenshots of my favorite lines, and I emailed them to you afterwards just to be like, I can't decide which is my favorite. It was either A or B. And you just responded with laughter. And I feel like that's a pretty accurate review of the book, like what you want.
Yeah, that is. It's, it's been a long time, because I have been so lucky in gigs and collaborators that I have done something that was not trying to stay ahead of movies and TV and potentially be something other than just a really funny comic. So it was sort of a return to, like the goofing and the fun and the hopefully carefree, just entertainment that like got me started, over 20 years ago now. The first comic I did was about Santa Claus after the apocalypse. It's from like that origin of deep space in my brain, you know, um, where you're just trying to do something for the sake of making your friends laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And that was even going back to like before I was writing, that there was so much of like my day was spent like, how can I get a laugh? It becomes like a first addiction kind of, making your friends laugh in school, or, I was sent into remedial CCD at our church. And that's actually where I met a lot of my friends that have been friends for life. And these were the first kids that I was riding to comic shops on bikes with and going to the first conventions in New York. And, like that was the impulse, and to follow through on that impulse in a pure way, and to be able to do that with Scott, who, is such a funny guy too. He really doesn't get enough credit for this or for the Deadpool stuff. I think we're going to just be credited as, like I'm sharing all of the credit with him in terms of this stuff, because I worked really loose. I've typically given him full scripts. This was full script, but I really didn't try to do any dialogue until stuff showed up later. The boards showed up, so he did a wonderful job. And making someone laugh, especially in a comic, it can be very difficult. You need to be able to do a lot of things well. You have to have comic timing yourself, which can't be really taught, unfortunately. And he's acting. The acting on those faces is so good.
I really like the usage. I mean, just early on, I knew I was going to like the book because there is a page of Thum sound effects that evokes Walt Simonson's Thor
Yes,
run.
yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, what am I getting into? And then it finishes with a man looking at seismographs, eating a giant sandwich, saying, the city's in for a good fucking. And you're just like, what am I about to read? But in a good way?
I'm glad. I hope. I mean, I did ask the folks at Image, I was like, do we have to put this in a plastic bag? And then they were like, no, you read Sex Criminals, right? And I was like, okay, cool. All right, just making sure.
My shop will absolutely put it in a plastic bag. Anything that's vaguely inappropriate or even conceptually inappropriate in a plastic bag. This goes beyond vague or conceptually.
I know. And I forget if the PDF I gave you had Gary Brown's sketch cover.
Oh, I don't think
Did
so.
it? Yeah, because I thought, well, I don't want to really get any stores closed down, but it was a riff on Jaws with the shark swimming up, but it was
Oh no,
King Dong's member swimming up towards the surface, and so that was one that I was like, I haven't said no to anything yet. Should I start saying no now? It's confusing when you're just trying to do something that's pure, because again, like I'm not taking this comic book and I'm not walking it around town under my arm here trying to sell it.
right?
I don't anticipate anyone will want that. It only has to be a great comic, which is true of any comic that we're doing. But when I am lucky enough to be, in the position I am, I also know, hey, someone may try to rip these pages out and stuff them into a camera someday. This is not that. And I think these things are like, when you can give your mind a rest and just do something like this as an exercise, it actually adds, I think, like time, like that your brain is resting, and then you come back into those other activities that I have, and I'm fresher for it. It's good to do those things.
So you told me via email that it was born of wanting to have fun to take your minds off of the craziness of the world. And I do think it's interesting when you kind of look at it through the prism of like the COVID era, not to go way too deep into a Giant Kokjü book, but at the same time, I do wonder, a lot of people look to things that they used to love, that they kind of got into not, nostalgia to some degree to find comfort during that time. And it's interesting that in your own way, and maybe in Scott's own way, you kind of flash back to comics you used to do where it was just you riffing and just you having fun. Is that kind of part of where that, taking your minds off the craziness of the world, is that kind of where it manifested from to some degree?
I think so. It really did come from the darkest days of COVID. And some of the other ways that it manifested too for me were, on X-Men, Planet Size sort of took on a new meaning. That was a different muscle group. We wanted to be as optimistic as we could. This was also, oh, things are bad. Well, how could, things could always be worse. Like if a monster came ashore and dry humped a building into rubble, that would be worse than what we're having. And seeing Scott be able to draw those things in such a way, really I knew that we were going to have something that was worth doing once those sketches came in. And I said, okay, I got it. I know what this is. I've always loved cartoons. Like I've loved all of the classic sort of like the old Tom and Jerry's and that sort of thing. And there was an impulse just to be fun in these dark times. And again, I don't anticipate it will be everyone's cup of something, but it will be enough. It will be for my friends. I know they will all laugh because I've shown it to them. It's been very fun to get that reaction of, oh, it's not just fun, it's also unexpected, and that's what we want. We talked to or I think creators talk about like the spinner rack as this place we used to go where you'd have no idea what was there week to week. New Comic Day back when I was reading, I think it was a Wednesday, or I'm sorry, I think it was a Tuesday, and then it was a Saturday, and then once the direct market kicked in. But those were like locked in days. You would go to the spinner rack and see what you got. And obviously what we're just trying to do here is sort of subvert any expectations of, oh, well, we got to make our PG-13 rating. Who's going to get to say the F word once? This is just, everyone says the F word on every page because it's insane. Did you read the Pro back in the day? That was also something that I don't know if we hit necessarily the Pro stratosphere, but that did this so well that it couldn't not be an inspiration.
Mm-hmm. I did read the Pro, and I think it kind of hits on the same territory. One thing I will say that is, I don't know if it's advantageous, but one of the things, like you're when I was reading the Giant Kokjü, it was like I kept, like it felt like it kept building to a point, and I was like, I don't think they're going to go to that point. And then you got to that point, and then you just kept going past the point. I'm like, how far are they going to go in this? My God. Like, it just kept going. And it was interesting because, like, the Pro from the start, you knew it was going to be kind of just bonkers. But there's a version of this book that you did with Scott where it could have just been a straightforward kaiju book that you never took to that next level. But you just kept finding new levels.
I'm glad you thought so. That was the goal. It is spiritually sort of our like aristocrats in that we had enough time to work as fast as we could, but as diligently as we could to go, all right, we're 30 pages in of what we assume is going to be a 60 or 70 page book. Like we need to like quote, leave it all out there. And so there was, as always, there's some jokes that don't show up because they didn't exist until Scott conjured them. And some of that is the fighter pilot banter, which I actually I quite enjoy. It's very stupid. And then there's the sight gags, in the background as these humans are sort of arguing about this. You can see this monster sort of emptying a zoo down its throat. And, I think everyone has what's funny about these books too, they always become like parables for the era that you're in, like the obviously Godzilla was directly related to the atomic age and those attacks. This I sort of tried to marry off as, hey, this poor big dumb creature doesn't have a mate anymore because of global warming. I don't 100% know if that works, but I almost felt like it needed it as the direct sort of nod to our past, So I'm glad it hit for you. The hi-fi colors I thought were great, and Joe Sabino really showed up and did some wonderful things. This is a team I hope that will be together for a long time. We're talking about doing more and different stuff. And Scott said something very funny to me at the end of this. I said, Scott, just so you know, I go, you crushed this. We did a lot of funny stuff on Deadpool. We've done a lot of funny stuff after. I think this is your best work. And he goes, thanks. I think so too. I really don't want to do comedy next.
Which you worked into the book.
I know. And I said, I promise.
Oh my God. Did you pitch Scott on this, like the idea, or did you come up with it together?
I think this was an idea that I had that I brought to him, but it was very much a gestational sort of like, hey, what if a giant monster had a dick and you had to look at it the whole time? And when I pitched the sort of the end fight, the comp was, hey, Eastern Promises, that's a tough fight to watch. And when there's the nude fight in the sauna, like, let's do that with a mech. And those were just the bare bones ideas that became, something that has a lot of heart. The family that we put in jeopardy at the middle has their own stuff going on. And, Scott draws these characters and they feel very lived in. He has his own style and it can change. I don't know if you've ever talked with Scott, but Scott would be an interesting guest when you have some time. He was a Ramita Raider. Did you know that?
A what?
So back in the day when when primarily all this stuff was put together in the New York offices at Marvel in the bullpen, inevitably either artists would make mistakes or like due to editorial reasons, someone was in the wrong uniform. And then the art department that was there would correct it, the in-house one, because there wasn't time to like FedEx the boards back. So John Romita trained a group of artists to be what became known internally as Romita Raiders.
Oh.
And so Koblish was one of these artists that was very talented and had different gears, and then became very adept at mimicry. So, like if Sal Buscema's pages needed to have, Spider-Man in a different outfit, nobody seemed to ever notice that these guys would clock in when the boards were done and fix something. And that's why Scott was so good at what we did in Deadpool, where we would time jump and do these fake inventory issues from different eras, because that was his entrance into all of this, was doing art corrections, but literally learning from the man himself. So it's really, he's got some great stories and as a really young kid, like when I probably, you might be imagining a really older person now. Scott's a younger guy. Like he's got wisdom and talent beyond his years.
Oh, well, he told me not that long ago, actually, that he was one of the people who worked on like the X-Men Pizza Hut stuff for like Marvel special projects, because I was talking about it on the podcast and he heard it and he was like, I did that. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I don't know. It is funny. Like you talk about the style, like the ability to shift styles and everything. There's parts in this where it really reminded me of like Eric Larson's art specifically on like early run Savage Dragon. And like, even like the vibe to it, where I was just like, wow, this is like not what I expect from Scott, but it works really, really well. I do want to say though, it's a funny book to talk about because even though it's not plot oriented in a traditional sense, like if you've seen a kaiju movie, you have some level of expectation as to how this would play out to a degree. But I feel like talking about it at any level of depth is like doing it an extreme disservice because it's so ridiculous it deserves to be experienced fresh, if that makes sense.
Well, I do, and that's very kind of you, and I hope a good incentive for our retail partners to roll the dice on it. But I'm trying to get fans to go, hey, it's a 60-page commitment. You're in, you're out, and I think you'll be thoroughly entertained. Please pre-order it, and we'll see what happens. I think it'll eventually be a really fun little trade paperback that I don't think we'll revisit, or maybe we will. Right now, I'd have a hard time understanding how we'd top ourselves.
I mean, there's some other kokju coming. So.
Yes, yes.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. The comics crowdfunding platform Zoop is rolling through 2023 with even more projects from incredible creators. This February, support campaigns such as 9 Lives from New York Times bestselling writer Steve Horton, the new Scarlet Twilight from Ben Morse, Gilgamesh Eternal from Cam Kirkhow, Volume 3 of the super successful Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll series, and The Magic Necklace from indie comics superstar editor Claire Napier. There are even more live campaigns and more surprises to be added throughout the month, so check out zoop.gg for more. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the checkout is easy and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons to your cart, provide some info during the checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. Looking to crowdfund your project? Email Zoop at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign and learn more at blog.zoop.gg. And now, back to the show. I will say one of the other things I really like about it is like there's all these, it's very, kaiju oriented, working off tropes of that. There's also a lot of societal commentary in there. But then there's like these brief moments where it's just like 80s action movie type stuff where like there's this line of like is a silent page of, well, a kaiju humping a building. And then at the end of it is like this general or whatever it is from like I don't even know what branch of the military who just says, yeah, I reckon it's mating season. And it's like such an 80s action movie line. It's funny. It's like, it really touches on a lot of like, I don't know, like societal or like cultural touchstones and does it in the most extreme way humanly possible.
Well, I thank you. And I'm super glad it hit for you. It'll be out this spring. The final order cut off for the first issue is in March. And I just, again, for anyone that rolls the dice on it and doesn't laugh, I admire you for taking the leap. And if you laughed and liked it, I'm sure we could all be friends.
I mentioned before we started recording that I was going to bring up Timing Luck, your photography book, in relation to this. And
oh, yeah.
I do think it's interesting to like look at kind of how you creatively have reacted to what we've had to go through over the last few years. Like, during that time, I saw a lot of families online turning to like elaborate Rube Goldberg machines and stuff. And you turned to an enormously sexually frustrated kaiju as a path to societal commentary and a photography book. And I am interested in, how do you think the pandemic and the upheaval in the world has impacted you creatively, like the last few years? Like, do you feel like Timing Luck was at least in part a response to you not being able to travel, right?
Yeah, it's 100% true. We all got put into stasis in one way or another. And yeah, I enjoyed walking around and shooting pictures, but in a way, in a sense, the pandemic was beneficial to my photography because it forced me to put the camera down and then pan for gold. I never really looked at what I was collecting. And I not only, like, to my horror, I discovered, oh my God, some things that I thought were backed up were completely missing from my cloud service. I try, because I try to have a cloud backup, and then I try to have physical drives. And again, it's easy to get your information fractured. I would travel a month out of the year total, probably to New York for editorial retreats. Well, many of those pictures ended up on a laptop. Anyway, what was interesting was I corrected that possibly fatal error, got everything backed up, and then I just started looking at what I had and going in chronological order, and I sort of accidentally wrote a visual biography of my last 20 years like a creative in a creative life in Los Angeles. And I've had a lot of wonderful opportunities, and for a lot of them I would have that camera, and I didn't even know why I was taking photos. But that if comic books were my first love, photography was my second. And it's funny, I have the camera that my father bought in Vietnam is still our film camera now, and I just had the shutter cleaned up, and so we're going to pick that up this weekend. And I got my son interested in photography, so it forced me to look backwards. I'm grateful for the experience of putting together the photo book, because I don't want to leave 20 hard drives and a Dropbox link to my son. I'd rather just go, hey, here's what I saw, and here are the ones I liked. I had to get over why I was doing it. I was like, hey, am I doing this because I'm vain, because I'm showing off, because I'm actually doing it, I think, for those reasons, sure, but I actually really do like the photographs. I think, if nothing else, it's a Leica lens that shot most of it, and it's some of those photos are really just buttery. They turned out great. They were so good I couldn't screw them up.
I do think it's interesting how you kind of split it, because it's like three main sections, right? It's like kind of your time like behind the scenes in like Hollywood, your time behind the scenes in like Marvel, and then places that you specifically loved and everything like that, and just the photography. And I do think it's interesting how those two sides, I mean, not equal weight, but kind of equal weight, where both are very meaningful, those connections you have, but also like the places you've been in, like it seems like you particularly like nighttime settings in cities. And I do think that's pretty cool, where you get kind of two different affinities for you as a person, is like the people side, but also like the side that's more oriented on observation and on experiencing things.
I think the more we can listen, the better a writer will be, and if we can observe, I think I always love doing your podcast, but I also think the more I talk, the probably the dumber I sound. I really like to go out and listen to people and what they're talking about, and they never know that I'm listening, or they hopefully don't. I don't mean to be a snoop, but that's also what a photographer is, right? We're sort of creeping around shooting in the dark. And I have always been a night owl, and I think cities have a totally different vibe by night than they do by day. And the more we observe, the better we are, I think. And so, I think the book gets better too, because by the time that third part kicks in, it's a lot of like interesting stuff, I think, in Los Angeles and then Tokyo, and they were both deserted for different reasons. One because of COVID, and the other was I was fortunate enough to have landed in Tokyo as it was being lashed by a typhoon, and the streets were empty. So I was like, everyone else was like, I gotta go to bed. I was like, I gotta get in the streets. This is never going to happen again for me. Empty Akihabara.
I was there right after the big earthquake in 2011. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, my parents really were like, you should not go. And I'm like, no, I'm still going to go. I was on this big world trip, and I was, I just decided to go. And it was interesting because I was staying in hostels, and almost every hostel was completely empty. And it was interesting because in that experience, like, Japan is a big tourism industry, and there was a lot of people who would actually come up to me and like shake my hand and thank me for like coming, because overnight, almost 100% cancellation rate, besides David Harper. And it was a really interesting experience because I think I kind of got an unusual experience, sort of like what you did, where you got to see a different side of the country and the culture and everything because of this very unique environment you got yourself into.
Totally. It's a wonderful, wonderful country, wonderful people. Once, and I think this is true probably of many cultures, once they see that you're attempting to communicate, and now it's even easier, right? It's like that now we have translators in our ear that will sort a lot of this stuff for us. If anyone is looking for an incredible vacation, you really should consider taking some time and going. That's so. Where did you go? Were you traveling? Did you hit Kyoto?
I did, yeah. I flew to
Yeah,
Tokyo and I went
so
to
good.
I went to Osaka and I went to Hiroshima and I went to God, I went to Kyoto, and I also went to some other places just around that area. I did not go north for obvious reasons, but it was an amazing experience. I really loved it. But a big part of Time and Luck is about your time at Marvel and working with all the people you worked with when you go to retreats and everything like that. And are you cool jumping into talking about your X-Men run a little bit?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I do think it's kind of interesting. The last time you were on the podcast, you were just announced as taking over that series in a new
Right.
volume with Pepe Larraz, and you're now 18 issues in. So we've never actually really been able to talk about the book because I think it was even before Planet Size, so we didn't even know what was happening at that point.
Oh yeah, I know. I felt bad about that because I was like, man, is there any way I could like get you planet size? Because we're talking about all this stuff
Oh
and
no,
obliquely in such circles. But yeah,
I was fine with it. I mean, I prefer reading Planet Size en natural without being teased or anything like that. But
yeah,
in terms of your run, though, your run and the nature of the villain, Dr. Stasis, were like both born to some degree from a 30-page pitch document you had sent to Jonathan Hickman and Jordan D. White and C.B. Cebulski, in which you talked about how the line needed to reinvest in villains. I think that's one thing that's really been a success in your run. Like Stasis is great. Fei Long, I think, is fantastic.
oh good,
And I'm sure we're going to see much more of that character. But
yeah.
I am interested in, so you're in the X office, you're talking to everybody else there. There's all these people who are kind of, part of the team, but also kind of the top of the team, like the Hickman and White and Cebulski at the time.
Yeah,
What made villains a priority in your mind from the start?
it's a great question. It's because of the magic and the success of what Jonathan and RB and Pepe and all of the collaborators from the bullpen on. Everything that came before me was such a smash that I knew, even if it wasn't me, whoever was going to sit in that chair um, had to make a swerve into the new, the way that Jonathan did. Everything was new. The mutants, that handshake between Apocalypse and Charles, was the cement on a new era. But you were also trading, right? The idea of, okay, well, we don't have Apocalypse as a Black Hat. We don't have Magneto as a Black Hat. What's the goal? And so luckily, everything was such a towering hit before me. I could go, okay, well, what does the universe push back on? And the idea that humans were going to say, how long do you expect us to take this for? And Fei Long, was right there from the get-go. He had his Mars dream crushed by the mutants. And now I think we're in a place where we can talk about how that creeping fascism that Orcus and the humans have is infecting everything. We have Fei Long making moves against Tony Stark. He's I think going to be a wonderful forever gift as both a Lex Luthor and a metahuman that can challenge him both as Tony Stark and Iron Man. Stasis has like some incredible stuff coming up. Kieran's writing some Stasis that is going to be wonderful. And I'm getting a crack at a couple of things. And then we have our Hellfire Gala, and we've already said this is the fall of X. It is, to reach back into the old Marvel lore of bring on the bad guys. we are bringing on the bad guys. And I think the real gift of this is to know that the better we are to the villain, the more generous we are in terms of panel time and motivation and what they're loving and what they're hating, the better the story will be. And so I couldn't be more excited about the stuff that I'm actually writing really this month. We're writing summer of 23 right now, and it's gonna be a big swerve. I hope it's been a hit for everyone. I've been having the time of my life. It's beyond any hope or expectation I ever had to be collaborating on X-Men.
I do think one of the interesting things about your run is that, there's a lot of different changes to this era of the X-Men. I think in a lot of ways, a lot of the biggest conflicts have been kind of internal.
Yeah.
And that's when you said that you were kind of looking to like, how do I go in a different direction from what Jonathan was doing? It's interesting how maybe the clearest direction, I mean, especially after you did it, but the clearest direction was, what if we refocused on a more traditional superheroics type of idea and like the type of things that you come across when you're a superhero, which is supervillains? How much of your initial plan was oriented on kind of differentiation, if you will, and like coming up with goals for the book that weren't exactly the same as what preceded you?
It was very much talked about when Jonathan first told me that he was going to be stepping back and, hey, if this were to happen the way I think it would, and the chair opens up, would you be interested in leaving Marauders and having this opportunity? And I was like, oh my God, that like, let's jump on the phone and talk about this. But we knew, and I believe this was right from Jonathan, he felt he got away with murder by not having the X-Men as a superhero team, because he had that so much to do and was very economical about it. But one issue of X-Men, right? There wasn't necessarily a team of X-Men for almost all of his run, really. Whereas here, and I think what's becoming clear to people is not only is it a team, but it's a team that has democratically elected, mutant representation. And, the fun thing that we try to do is give the fans a choice. I hope it's fun anyway. It seems to cause a lot of stress, which I guess everything. So, but that's the really fun thing. And I think people will be seeing that if you have been on the X-Men in this particular era, you're sort of always an X-Men. Sunfire was asked by Arakko to go save Redroot, and that's story is going to come back to the forefront now, even though he's not really on the X-Men team at the moment. But that's what it means to serve on the X-Men. Once an X-Men, always an X-Men. And we're going to start breaking hearts, David. It's going to be a whole thing.
Are you suggesting that a storyline called Fall of X is not going to be cheerful?
Well, it's going to certainly have its silver linings. It's funny, we always try to really, and I think we've been very successful at jealously guarding story. We have tried not to give anything away if it was something that we were expecting anyone to pay for. And there was a time when it felt very porous, that you could get leaks and news. And I've been very proud about how a lot of this stuff has remained under wraps, but I'm also sensitive to the business side. On the Iron Man front, we gave up the Stark Sentinels that, obviously not Tony's idea, but someone is using this technology in a new way. And I think that's good. We have to market it. So when the idea of calling it Fall of X came up, I was like, well, okay, we're just going to tell everyone, hey, this is happening, and what it means you'll have to pay for it. But it's where we might bump into and make bruises of the art when it tries to cross Commerce Street, it can be a little difficult, but um, it's not going to impact anyone's enjoyment of it.
No.
But yeah, we're going to break hearts.
I do think it's interesting. I'm going to do a quick jaunt over to Invincible Iron Man just for a second, because I think what you just said is important. Another thing that I think you could argue with the Krakoa era is that it's very internal focused, both in terms of like not really having the villains in the traditional sense. Although I do want to rep for horticulture, because I still think horticulture is amazing.
They're in the next issue. Yeah, they're in 19.
Oh, hell yeah.
Spoiler.
I'm all about it. Not only was it internal focus in that way, but it's also outside of Judgment Day, which is a pretty significant outside of, because it was a massive crossover. By and large, what happens on Krakoa stays in Krakoa, not really in a Vegas sort of way, but there's like a siloing almost to some degree. And I'm curious as to whether or not your Invincible Iron Man run, which, seemingly is going to have Emma in it a little bit. It had Fei Long in the first issue, I want to say. And it sounds like Fei Long is going to be in there a bit more too. The Stark Sentinels thing is going to happen. It seems like there's tendrils being formed between that book and Krakoa in a way that weren't really happening in a significant degree before. Is that at least in part the intent with Invincible Iron Man?
I think so. I think really it's about the story that we want to tell in X-Men is so big that it needs to boil over in a good way. The Iron Man gig, it was a strange one, because I shot a couple of emails and I said, hey, I have a couple of ideas, and I was wondering what the status would be moving forward. And they said, oh, this is arriving at an interesting moment, because, we're talking about a pivot here, and, Chris Cantwell may be ending his run. And, I said, well, I need to just gather my thoughts and be able to discuss them. So let me go away. And what everyone agreed on was that there needed to be a tremendous Iron Man story for his anniversary year. And luckily I had it. I am giving him something to make that I do know how to make. And that is, I'm having him work out his autobiography in these pages. And that's been really fun. We're going back. Issue 7 that I'm writing right now is actually like a flashback issue. So the goal was, hey, we're going to have some new toys and new threats in the present, but I'd also love to sort of celebrate this anniversary in a fun way by going back to the classic armors. Like the Silver Centurion armor is one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. And so how can we tell a story in the past that is complementary and, nourishing to the one that we're telling now. And, I had some experience with this in the Deadpool business. We did that a bunch, but this is a really big story. It's a really crushing one. I'm as proud of the Iron Man story as anything I've ever done at Marvel. And I think by the time I get there, it'll be sort of it also, by the way, it's funny. It's almost a relief to write Iron Man after writing team books, where you go, hey, now this is like a totally different beast. It's a solo. Yeah, sure. I'm writing Riri. I'm writing Rhodey. I've got some other, characters in there, but I just need to focus on Tony. Versus when you're writing X-Men, you're reading a lot of scripts. You're reading a lot of comics. You're doing a lot of like orbital. I feel like sometimes an air traffic controller for all the things that we need to do. But what's funny is, this is something that I've been living with in one way or another since 2018, the X-Men stuff, so it's not quite 5 years of actual plotting, because it was quite late in 2018, but, Marauders existed on paper and was getting approved in the waning days of that year. And, pretty quickly it became the X-Men gig. And I, again, truly lucky to be surrounded by so many wonderful editors and other writers in that X Slack. I will say one observation too, just about how Krakoa felt siloed. And I don't think you're alone in feeling that, but I think there's different reasons for it. And one of the reasons really is COVID. The Marvel offices, to go into, to borrow studio speak, they got snapshored, that everyone working from home. The X-Men Slack is as big as other offices are in totality, so we have always had this. We were better at, I think, being in COVID than maybe other folks would have. And I don't mean that as a slam. I just mean we were already interconnected. So by the time, editors weren't walking to lunch with each other or going out or talking and knocking on doors, we were already sort of not quite a hive mind, but we had a place to go work it out. So.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's Bad Idea, and the Renegade comic book publisher is back doing their crazy antics. The latest includes putting a comic from Mark Waid and David Lapham, The First Supper, into a recent edition of Previews for Order completely randomly. Or it was the latest, until Bad Idea also snuck a new comic from Joshua Dysart and Kano, The First 7 Days, into the same edition of Previews. Don't worry if you missed it, because you probably should have, as it was hidden under the publisher name B-Side Press with fake creator names. That's how Bad Idea rolls, though, making notable comics with great creators in extraordinarily unusual ways. Keep your eye out for whatever's next with Bad Idea, if you can. And now, back to the show. I do think it's interesting, working off of what you're saying about the solo book versus the team book, too. Invincible Iron Man has to feel considerably different, both for that reason, but also because, you just mentioned it, like you have the structure of the X office, the interconnectivity of the X Slack. And then on top of that, X-Men stories have a very established approach based off of what like Jonathan and like Tom Moeller like kind of developed the data pages and everything. And so I imagine Invincible Iron Man feels very different from an approach standpoint in a lot of different ways.
It does. It does. It's in a good way too. If it had felt like it was leg day every day, you're gonna have a problem. And I am such a fan. I mean, my comic book collection, I was reading all of the Armor Wars off the rack. I was living and dying by all of this stuff. And I remember Tony filling the armor with the, blood bags to fake his death. And, there's few characters I love as much as him. And even though I'm really going to do a number on him, I do hope that people understand it's my job to torture these people. It's a very sadistic thing. You love something, but you love a character or a team or some IP. It's your job to go in and make things uncomfortable. I become the real enemy.
It is interesting how that is kind of like a comic writer's job, is just basically to perpetually put people's favorite characters through the ringer. And imagine that's especially difficult in like the X-Men sense, where I think it was Jonathan who put it this way, where basically like X-Men fans think that all of their favorite characters deserve a solo book, basically. And
Yeah.
And so like by putting, I don't know, I imagine a lot of people have developed strong feelings for like Sync and Laura Kinney's relationship. The 500-year-old Laura Kinney, not the current.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to distinguish the two. I think one is going by Wolverine, the other one's going by Laura. But anyways, I imagine a lot of people are very invested in that. And it's if I'm going to say if and when that relationship goes south, you're going to get some fan letters, and like there's nothing you can do about it.
There's nothing I can do about it. You're absolutely right. Jonathan was also right. And if I have to break hearts, I will also be right. It's one of those rare things that happens when everyone gets to be right. And it's, again, the we're writing hyper-violent soap operas, and we're always talking about that, about how, hey, don't forget, there's a lot of soap opera coming in the spring and summer, and a lot of violence. And I won't say directed at whom or to where, or but there are going to be some really big, lasting bruises to come. And we're calling Vault Laura Talon. We
Oh,
gave
okay.
her her own. We gave her her own name, but I think that might be in an issue that you're just about to get. And yeah, we talked about that. That was also a story where I pitched Jonathan that Forge would hack the vault, and that was in a I think that was in Chicago at the room right.
Oh, right before the pandemic.
Yeah, we had ratified so much stuff, and some of it changed. A lot of it didn't. But it's funny. I said this the other day to someone, or I tweeted it, or it's like I'm scripting ideas that go back further than that. That were days, when it to New York in 2018 and 2019, when we said, oh yeah, and that's the reason. X is the reason that Y happens, and Y it happened, and so there's a lot of things going back even to our earliest issues that will come around in the next year. So if fans have been enjoying it till now, I think their enjoyment will only grow. And I'm always aware of trying to open the doors to new readers. I think if you are either a lapsed X-Men reader or you have not read this era of X-Men, I do think you can jump into Fall of X and go, holy hell, what are they doing? Because it's really, and some of the pieces that are sliding into place in the weeks before, I think it's X-Men 21 has one of my favorite entrances for a character you'd never expect who will come to have a very important beat. Yeah, really fun stuff that is, a byproduct too of bouncing ideas, not just with Jonathan, but with Ben, and even, Chip is out of the office and has been for a while, but we have stuff that goes back that far that we're going to crush it, and we haven't even talked about some of my favorite books, like the stuff that Cy and Al and Kieran are doing. So it's fun to be doing what I'm doing when you're also enjoying the other work. It's not always the case.
I do think that's kind of one of the interesting things about this. I don't even know what you would call it. There was like the Dawn of X kind of era that was like it didn't last until Inferno, but let's just say like there was the Dawn of X to Inferno era. And now you're kind of in this new period. And I think during the time where Jonathan was kind of I know he didn't like the term showrunner, but the showrunner.
Yeah.
X-Men, the adjectiveless X-Men was kind of the de facto flagship book for the line. And now I think it's a little bit more. You used the word democratic earlier. It's a little bit more democratic, where it's like X-Men has its piece, but Immortal X-Men also has its piece, and even X-Men Red to a certain degree kind of has its piece. And I'm not saying the other books aren't great, but those are kind of like the ones that are like the headliner big event type stuff. But you brought up Marauders earlier. How different does writing X-Men feel to writing Marauders? Because they're both team books, but they also have much different intent behind them.
Yeah, I think, the Marauders had its outward facing mission, and, the sort of the inward, as a way to get mutants onto the island. That was sort of the quiet part. And the X-Men, though, is pure of heart and intent. And a lot of it just goes back to that first issue of, hey, we're literally going to plant roots here, and we're going to fight for you. And if need be, we're going to die for you, because we love you. And, this is what we can do it. And so we will. It will be done. And when you open a book with Pepe, you want to leave as big a bruise as possible. Not everyone will ever get an X-Men #1 issue. And so we put a lot of love into that as a mission statement of going, we are here not just, for mutantdom, but like this is something that we're committing to. Like we want to be the #1 call, the #1 911 call when it all goes down. And yeah, that was the goal, is to say the X-Men has not always been a team of superheroes. They've been different things, and that's what they are in this moment. And we'll see who loves and fears them for it.
I mentioned the 30-page document you had going into it. I'm sure parts of year 2, it sounds like I'm sure parts of year 2 on the book were in that initial document. It sounds like some of the Vault stuff was in there from the beginning. But has year 2 on the book been different for you in terms of intent or approach from year 1? Like, did you have different goals for it after starting the series, wanted to develop some new villains?
I don't think so, because that document, which I'll give you someday, is you'll see where it became outdated, or there was, AXE was still probably a glint in Tom's eye. So that's not in there, right? There are other accommodations. I also had to be careful because we knew we were going to be, borrowing from Legion with the elections. I had to be flexible. So I had spine characters. I knew how important Sync and Laura were, and I knew how important Scott and Jean were, and making sure that everyone else got a big chunk of meat. But the real answer to your question is, we've been writing backwards now for a while. Like, we know, I knew going in, I had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was all ratified. And it's such a good feeling to know that you have like the trust of, it really extends beyond even, Jonathan and Jordan. It goes to CB and Dan and probably Burbank. And you're great. You got your runway approved, and it hasn't wavered. Like, we have, the commitment has been there the whole time. So as we, are asking everyone to put their tray tables up in Fall of X, like, I know where we're landing. And it's been such a good feeling to be able to execute on it, because it has been the best stuff since the top.
Yeah. When you say you said like going backwards, like you've been kind of going backwards through it. What do you mean by that?
Well, I know where I'm now writing backwards in a way.
Like you're kind of reverse engineering from the point where you need to end up at or something?
Like, yeah.
Okay.
And as you know, in comics, because of the speed at which they move, nothing else in any media compares to writing a comic book in 100 days and having it come out. But when you do something a little bit more complicated that has multi-year arcs, we looked at the Hellfire Galas, and I was like, those are act breaks. That's what those are. And so knowing that we want to have, the biggest, best art possible at all times, but also when we are going to wrap up, we have to be writing that stuff concurrently. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on.
I mean, I guess that's one of the things that's really interesting about the X-Men line. And maybe this is all lines and I'm not really thinking about it in the right way, but it's like you look at Inferno. And so Inferno is a starting point. And then maybe at that point you already had Fall of X. And it was all about trying to connect point A and point B in a way that maximizes the entertainment of the story, but also gets you where you need to go. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's one of the things that I don't really think about as a comic reader, is how you're trying to move with both sides at the same time to end up in the right place, if that makes sense.
It's totally one, it is that. We often compare it to like not steering one ship, but steering a fleet of ships.
Oh boy.
And knowing like some of those ships move at different speeds, and they have different displacement, and they have different things that they need to do. so there's been puzzling things. Like I see people ask, well, why this and why that? And what they don't know is that it's just future story that we are accommodating in a different way. It's a, the comic book business is aggressively progressive. We're trying to outpace all other forms of imagination, but we also have a very 20th century business model, and we are often lying our faces off in solicits and on covers in order to obfuscate what we're doing. The best example of that, I guess, is the Hellfire Gala and Planet Size. The Hellfire Gala being camouflage for Planet Size, because nobody asked us even what Planet Size was, even though Pepe was drawing it, because you had all these wonderful Russell designs and Mateo designs and all this high fashion stuff. Everyone was like, their appetite was already whetted. And so, I think the hip readers sort of knew where we were going there, but we were able to surprise people. And that's what we want to do. We want to be able to surprise people. I promise, even if you think Fall of X is a diminishment of X, it certainly is a fair guess. I don't think you're ever going to see how it happens and how dire it will be. But, or I hope you can. Or if you can do it, then you should get in touch with Jordan D. White and join up. There may be openings available.
I have to say, in terms of surprises, I didn't expect the Vault storyline coming. And as much as I've enjoyed your entire run, but that was my jam. Like, I love the Vault stuff, but cool. But also like the Forge focus and just kind of how casually monstrous he is about using like Caliban as like a suit, basically, and things like that. Like, all of that was really fantastic. And it's interesting because it was kind of, again, like we talked about how you kind of want to swerve from what Jonathan had done previously, but it was like it was the time where it felt the most connected to that previous volume. Why did you want to go back to that dingling thread?
I wanted to go back because it's obvious. I think it's, they're all great X-Men stories that Jonathan did, but those ones in particular, I think, are very special. Mm-hmm. We had talked about the what ifs, hey, what if this, what if that? The what if Forge hacked the Vault just became an indelible what if of going, okay, well, we got to answer that question. What does that look like? And then what do we get out of that? And again, like I had as much fun as I could with Sync and Laura in the way that I had them before, but I didn't think it was going to be bad to give Sync his partner back. And as it happens, there are two gets there. The other being, we got to further Darwin's story. And some of these stories, I understand in a monthly comic sense, it can be frustratingly slow. I can't speed up time, but one day it will be a book and you'll just bounce into another chapter and continue on with a story that you're very interested in. And so Darwin has, re-entered the stage in a very changed way that I think will be very fun to explore. And obviously right now things are great for Sync and Talon. So everyone kind of got what they want, which should make everyone really nervous.
I know. I mean, isn't that's the nature of storytelling? Is like, as soon as things start looking really good, that's when you need to start being worried.
If there are, if Krakoa is for lovers, everyone should be a little on edge. Everyone should be a little on edge right now.
Well, the last X-Men question I have for you is, you mentioned this earlier. You've been in the larger X-Men world publicly and actively speaking since October 2019, but since late 2018, it sounds like. Do you feel like you've changed because of the experience?
It's a really good question that I don't know the answer to. I'm only sort of realizing in the last few months how difficult the last few years have been for me personally, like just outside of comics. I'm very far from my parents. and they're getting older, and I'm where I need to be, and they're there, and they're where they need to be. And, even I think middle age is probably difficult enough. But then, you start to, like, my son's 13. He actually doesn't need us as much as he used to. And even that can be difficult. And all of that stuff is what you kind of bring into the work. And for Phil and I, as one example, and when we were writing Cable, that was really about kids not needing their parents as much as they used to, and like letting go. For us, it sounds silly. I don't know if any of that stuff comes in, but that's what we were talking about then, and our kids are basically the same age, and they're going to be off to high school and college and everything. So the answer is, I think I have changed a lot. I don't know if this experience has changed me, because I've also made a change where I do not really engage in any way anymore, because I found it to be a waste of time. Even though mostly everyone has been very sweet, even the folks maybe not getting what they wanted, in their X-Men issue that week, still were commenting out of kindness. But they're for creators, I think the internet has like kind of worn the protective coating off wires, and the protective coating was always there for a reason. Like, if I wanted to know what someone thought about the comic, I could always do like a vanity search. How did it do? Did reviewers like it? Did they get it? No. Okay. Oh yes, great. But here, it just, anyone seems to be able to reach anyone any number of different ways. And for a guy that wrote a comic book called Analog about the unplugging of the internet, I felt particularly vulnerable to it. So I don't know. It's very funny. Somebody commented on a tweet that I did see. Like, I deleted it off my phone. So when I have something to yell about, I go to Twitter and I log in and I go, "Hey, this comic's out," or "This FOC," or "This other comic's great." And someone was like, "Yeah, I don't know why that one guy didn't like it." And I was like, "I didn't see that guy, but thanks for telling me about that guy."
It's a very useful addition to the conversation right there.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so at the end of the day, I can't tell you, David, it's such a simple formula that we're trying. If I can make the collaborators that I'm with happy, or make them go, "Oh God," or make them go, "Oh man, are you really doing that?" Like, I have a bunch of that stuff coming up, and make them kind of recoil, or make them, the gold standard is you made someone feel something. Then those artists will certainly have a chance to do the same, and then hopefully the reader will, and we're really into an era now where people will be feeling things, a lot of things.
I say this with respect to what is a very admirable goal, to not vanity search things. But if you don't vanity search the Giant Kokjü, I'm going to be very disappointed in you.
You know what? That's probably one where I can almost agree with anything I read. It's going to be such a Rorschach test of and I'm sure I will. It's easier to. I'll tell you, the reason why it's so fun to come here and talk to you, or to go on a word balloon, is it feels like this is how a discourse should happen, versus what happened when Facebook sort of crushed that great online media that I thought was that was there. It has not been kind to comics journalism, and everything feels like it's geared towards clickbait and not a discourse. And I think I'm not 100% sure I want to be part of the discourse. I don't think I should be. I think people should be able to say whatever they want and not feel like they need to bite their tongue because I'm there, or another creator is there, or what have you. I also think it's funny, David, sometimes I get messages that are, or see things where I go, "Boy, what a compliment," but you didn't have to do a drive-by on the previous administration, or like you could have just said you were liking the work. You didn't need to wish the other guy died in a car accident. So there is something that is funny, especially post-COVID, about how we are all talking to each other and how we are relating to each other. And it's obviously people are very frayed and very, I think, wounded. And I think we're still all processing a lot of the BS that has gone on. And whether even if you had a grand old time the last few years, probably the people in your life that you count as friends and loved ones have not. So there's a lot to go through. And I don't know when we're going to be normal again.
I don't either. But
I don't either.
I do know. I have to agree with you on the Rorschach test nature of Giant Kokjü, just because I do think the interesting thing, and I think this is actually a good thing. I know some people might disagree with this, but one way or another, people are going to kind of love it or hate it. And there's something magical about that. Like, ultimately, as a storyteller, you want, I think you said this earlier, you want people to feel things. And
yes,
not just like, and this is not me diminishing your X-Men work or the X-Men in general, but not just feeling things because people already have feelings about these things.
That's right. That's the nostalgia, right? Like
right.
I have my investment in Cyclops, so I care about Cyclops.
Exactly.
You want to be the new thing.
Yeah. Like nobody's invested in what's happening in Giant Kokjü, but one way or another, they're going to have some level of feelings. I don't think anybody's going to read that book and just be like, this is like something I've read before. Nope.
Well, that's really the goal, is to go, what am I doing that's new, or what will exist in the world when I'm done that wasn't there, that I would like to spend my money on. And that's, I have some more image work and some more things coming to Substack, and I have more, obviously I have my dream jobs at Marvel, and I am always trying to be aware of going, this is a $4 entertainment value in an era when eggs are $10. What am I doing to make sure that you're getting everything that you can? Because I have partners, right? All my artists, like Josh Cassard, does not want to waste a panel, right? Or Stefano Caselli does not want to sit there and draw a dead page. So what are we doing? And that's the pressure I feel for myself, is to go, all right, you know what? It's the X-Men and the Brood. We have a Brood story coming up. What's the thing that we haven't seen? What are we doing there? And we crushed that one too. So I'm feeling very, very good about where we're going. I'm glad you're having fun, and we are trying to never ever play karaoke, even though we might be playing some of the same instruments.
Well, I am looking forward to all of it, even though I imagine during Fall of X, I will at times not be excited, but also very excited about what I'm reading, because all the good things and bad things that are happening to some favorites. But Gerry, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about the Giant Kokjü, X-Men, Invincible Iron Man, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it, the opportunity to come and talk to you, and it was the highlight of the day. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Gerry Duggan. You can find his work in X-Men, Invincible Iron Man, and the upcoming The Giant Kokjü at Image Comics. If you thought this episode sounded a little bit better than usual, that's because Deanna. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Kevin Bides, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Matteo Ciccati, Chris Doré, Nir Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussett, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submed Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elzo Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Patrick Broward, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Walt's Comics and Books, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Dave Slusher, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed off-panels, outro, and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.